Well, welcome everyone to our Boardroom Beyond podcast. I'm really excited about our guest today, Edie Weiner, who is the president and CEO of the Future Hunters, and she's a futurist. And we're going to have a fascinating discussion, really looking at the big picture. Edie is actually also one of the founding members of WCD, so a longtime supporter. Welcome, Edie.
Nice to see you, Jennifer. It's a little cloudy here in New York today, but just disposition, sunshine.
Good. Sounds good. Well, I'm so excited to chat with you. I know you've spoken at our Global Institute before, and everybody always finds your perspective so incredibly interesting. So I'm going to jump right into it and wanted to talk about, how you see the global trends that are emerging right now. And, from your perspective, let's start the big picture.
The big picture is really big. And it is that we are at the cusp of entering a completely different civilization. And the world is feeling enormous shocks from that. I'm not going to go into too much detail here because it's a lecture in its own right, but I do want to hit the high notes of this. And when I say a new civilization, I'm going to make this really very simple and easy. I need to have it that way for my purposes, and I need to have it that way so that I can really work with my clients and audiences on explaining this. So if we look at all of human history, not through the lenses of scientific nomenclature, and there are many different kinds to classify the history of our civilization, whether you're using geological, anthropological, socio-historical, we can talk about things like Neolithic, Mesolithic, Paleolithic. I mean, there are just, you can go crazy trying to memorize all the terms. So I'm just going to give you four. And it's the first four Greek letters: alpha, beta, gamma, delta. And if we consider delta as being the first difference between what was human and what was not human on this planet, we can place that somewhere more than 2 million years ago or at about 150,000 years ago. And that depends on your particular science. If we think about civilization gamma as the first harnessing of external energy in service of the human species, we can think about 150,000 years ago with fire, or we can think about 15,000 years ago with the wheel. If we think about civilization beta as being the first large-scale agglomerations of population into towns and cities and the use of agriculture, we can probably date that anywhere from 15 to 20,000 years ago to maybe 6 to 7,000 years ago, if you want to look at your religion versus your science. And then if we think about where we are today, I would say we're still in civilization beta. However, we are already moving into civilization alpha. And that's critical. And why is it alpha? Why is it like the highest, the best, the most, the first, like you can't go beyond that? And that's basically because this is the first time in human history that we can do three things. We can completely destroy this planet, and we're doing a pretty good job of that. We can leave this planet with all the things that are attendant with leaving the planet. We're already doing some of that, and just the tip of the iceberg, but we will be getting deeper into the alteration and understanding of the time-space continuum. We will be getting much more knowledgeable about the fact that we can get energy from anywhere. Even our heartbeats, even the way we walk, there is energy everywhere. When it comes down to it, there's no solid matter in the universe. Everything at its core is energy. And so we're going to learn more about that as we develop our capability to leave this planet. But the third thing is also very interesting, and that is the ability to consciously design and redesign the many different futures of our own species. And we're already doing that through genetic engineering, through sensors, through implants and transplants, and through transformational things like synthetic biology, and just like brain research, and where we're getting to in terms of brain brain-computer interface and brain-machine interface. It's an enormous world. And I try to make people understand that it is not the future, it is the present. Because we're already doing so much of this stuff. And I use the example of two humans that have already lived and died in our recent history. One confined to a dark, dank prison cell for decades with access to no technology and no socialization at all, who emerged to change the future of his country. And that, of course, was Nelson Mandela. And the other who couldn't live, couldn't breathe, couldn't communicate, couldn't function without attachment to all kinds of technology, advanced technology, and who changed our conception of the origins of the universe. And of course, that's Stephen Hawking. So those are two different species, Nelson Mandela and Stephen Hawking, and they're already past. So as we look to the future and we look at the Special Olympics and we see people wearing prosthetics that they no longer hide, and they can perform at the same level as the most elite athletes in the world. As we look at the debate that is going on now as to whether AI is conscious, is intelligent, and where it's going to take us in the future, we're just knocking on the door, just entering, and that's civilization alpha, and that's going to change everything. And it is coming on very, very quickly. So the big picture is that we're actually at the cusp of a new civilization for humanity, where humans as we know them, or perhaps not in different forms, will leave the planet. Humans may evolve very differently because we are destroying the planet. And humanity may go off in all kinds of different directions because we can design the future of our species.
So as you think about this civilization alpha, what are those key risks that you think about? And also wanted you to touch a bit on two concepts that I find fascinating that you speak about: templosion and complexopacity.
Sure. Okay. So we'll leave the risks for a second because I'll cover them after I talk about templosion and complexopacity, because therein lie the risks. Templosion is our term for the implosion of time. Time is happening faster and faster, and it is imploding around even the biggest of things. Through genetic engineering, we can create in a laboratory in a few hours or a day or a few weeks what it would take nature hundreds of thousands of years, if that. We know that in a few years, the entire Arctic is going to become a shipping lane. We know that the lifespan of Fortune 1000 companies now is on average about 15 years. And the tenure of the CEOs of those companies, if we eliminate the Chinese companies, is somewhere about 3.5 years. There's something called flow. It takes 10, 20, 30,000 hours for you to learn something by doing it so many times, practicing it so many times, studying it so many times that you can do it automatically without thinking about it. And from those thousands of hours with transcranial direct stimulation technology, we can shrink flow down to 2 to 3 hours. So it doesn't matter where we look, we're speeding everything up. Time is imploding. And therein lies a risk, because we keep thinking that time flows in the same way it used to, and it does not. Everything is happening faster and faster, which requires the ability to reason with complexopacity. Complexopacity is a term that was first coined by some other futurists, not me, but it's one that I have used often to try and explain why it is that you can't think linearly anymore, that you can't assume that the way that you used to solve problems is the way that you can continue to solve problems, that the way you used to order the world, think about trends, is the way you used to be able to. And that's because we tend to conflate complicated with complex, and they are two completely different things. An automobile engine is complicated. It has many parts. They work together. If one breaks, perhaps others may fail or not, but we understand that. There's a mechanical interconnection that as engineers we can sort of look at and figure out. It's complicated, but it can be looked at, understood, and solved. Things that are complex are not that easy. And in fact, whenever you introduce humans into the equation, you wind up with issues that are complex rather than complicated. To understand the flow of events, trends, second and third order consequences, how things affect other things, you really have to understand that these are complex systems and complex times. And it's not like a machine that you can study and fix. You have to believe, for example, not in either or, but and, that more than one thing can happen at one time. You have to be able to believe that there are multiple ways of getting to the same conclusion, or that many conclusions can be gotten to from the same way of thinking. It means that you have to be able to do critical thinking. And we are dumbing down our population away from critical thinking. And that's a huge risk. That is one of the biggest risks that we face. We have stopped really thinking logically, critically, in complex fashion. And studies as long as 10 years ago found that young people had more critical thinking before they entered high school than when they graduated. And that they had more critical thinking before they entered higher education, colleges and universities, than when they graduated. And that's because what our education systems are tending to do is actually teach toward tests, teach toward careers, teach toward defined curricula. And they are shortchanging the ability for young people to just look at things and come at that with critical thinking.
It's really fascinating. And, as you think about how fast all of this is moving and all the different elements, boards do need to think differently now. And so what are your recommendations as we think about all these factors that you've taken us through and just the tempo of change, the complexity as we were talking about? What are your recommendations for board members today as they think about
oh my goodness,
corporate governance?
I have to tell you, Jennifer, when I do work with boards, it's like, please give me the time to explain to you all the things that you need to start beginning to understand. First of all, the board needs to be very aware of myths that need busting, because they're presented with them all the time. For example, we're interested in hiring the best and brightest. What does that mean? The best and the brightest, they're not the same thing. The best need the Super Bowl ring. The brightest need the Nobel Prize. They need to be hired for different reasons. They need to be rewarded differently. They need to be motivated differently. They care differently. And you don't always need the best in every situation. And you don't always need the brightest in every situation. So when you hear the best and the brightest, it doesn't mean anything. It's meaningless. When you hear the term empowerment, that's a term I hate. Because what does it mean? Empowerment means that somebody lent you power, but they could take it back. So power is what you take yourself and not what is lent. So you have to make a decision as to whether you're going to give the people in your company and yourselves power, or you're going to live in the world of empowerment where things can be taken away just as much as they can be given. And that changes trust in a system, and it changes outcomes very frequently. So we can go through all of those myths. There are many of them, but boards need to really listen carefully to when they're being told something that is just a throwaway term, and stop management and say, wait, what? What exactly are you talking about here? The second thing is that it's not so important to focus on the causes of risks. It's much more important to focus on the outcomes of those risks. So, for example, if your if your communication system was down, from the board perspective, it almost doesn't matter if that was because of a tornado or a hurricane or because of a terrorist attack. You need to be sure that you have planned for your communication system to be down. When we talk about cybersecurity, there's no such thing. There is only cyber insecurity. And so when you think about all of the risks that could create cyber insecurity, whether it's hacking or terrorism or just human error or a climate issue, whatever it doesn't matter. The fact is that cyber insecurity is the operable risk, and you have to plan for that. So instead of taking so much time trying to think of how this happened, it's more important to use that energy and time to make sure that things are taken care of should it happen. The next thing I would say is that you need to understand the culture of your organization. And that is typically done through surveys and questions, and they are all, in my book, useless. There is only one way that you can really understand the culture of any organization, whether it is corporate, nonprofit, governmental, family, religion, community. It doesn't really matter what the organization is. The only way you can truly understand it is understanding what are the carrots and what are the sticks, what's rewarded and what's punished. When you know that, you know the culture, because the words that are said, the programs that are offered, the norms that are supposedly set have absolutely no relevance. It's really about, am I going to be rewarded for doing this? Am I going to be punished for doing this? And if there are things as a board that you want the company to do or not to do, then you'd better take a really close look at how throughout the organization those things are being rewarded and or punished. The next thing that I would say is that because of Templosion and because of galloping technology and competition, and because of the fact that we have ingenuity coming from everywhere, it is really critical to take a look at what you consider to be strategic planning and break it down onto 3 tracks. If you were building a railroad, there's no way that you would put your express train on your local tracks. It doesn't make sense. Nor would you put a very long distance train making very few stops on your local tracks. You would build different sets of tracks. You need to do the same thing for strategic planning. You need your local track for your 1 to 3 year plans. And those need a particular type of person and people assigned to do that planning. They're much more in tune with current financial conditions and results, and the economic environment and the current competitive environment, 1 to 3 years. Then you need a track that is about, I'm going to say, your 5 to 7 year track. And that's your track that is basically looking out there as competition heats up. And as you know that from surprising sources, your core service or product could be challenged, and you may not be able to earn any, if all, money anymore from what you're expecting to be able to make your money on, whether that's a nonprofit that raises money in some way, or a for-profit that's got products and services in the marketplace, or even a government agency that delivers services, or an academic institution. that is delivering services and potentially product. You have to, in your 5 to 7 year track, ask the question, what happens if that goes away? If that ability goes away. And then you have to throw different kinds of people into that thinking. They're the ones who can say, well, that's because the competition could really come from here or there or here, or the regulation or the public opinion. I mean, they're the ones who are looking at the real threats, maybe 5 to 7 years down the road, to what your core competencies are and deliverables are. And then you need your 10 to 25 year track. And that track is completely, what can we possibly be in the future? If we take this whole future scenario way out there and don't assume that anything that's going on today has any legs as we head into that future, what do we stand for? Who are we? What is actually our vision as a company, as opposed to the strategies that we keep getting wedded to, but we have to keep throwing away because they're getting outdated, they're getting leapfrogged, and we need to look to the future. So you need to have another completely different group of people with a very different understanding of future potentials to take a look at that and start thinking about that. And you need to do all 3 tracks now because you're building this railroad. And the fact of the matter is that because of templosion, and here's the risk, the 1 to 3 year time frame will be shrunk to maybe 2 years. The 5 to 7 year time frame will happen within 3 to 4 years. And the 10 to 25 year time frame is going to be here way sooner than 10 years. And so if you don't understand templosion, and if you don't understand how to build a strategic scanning railroad set of tracks, there's huge risk there. Another thing that I would say is that the annual planning retreat that most boards generally have, I have not been too impressed with most of them. They are generally for the purpose of getting more information about what currently is going on. And the information that is delivered in many of those planning retreats can be easily done on paper, through a video, through regular meetings. Planning retreats should really be to open up the minds of the members of the board to the risks, challenges, and opportunities of the organization that the board is serving. And that means really a lot of time allowed for visioning, for the possibilities of what could be, for the input of the directors that is really not scripted, that is not on the agenda or capable of being delivered during regular board meetings. That annual planning meeting, given templosion, given the need for complex capacity, the need to think in complex terms, given the need for the galloping technology, the incredible changes we are going through, that strategic planning meeting once a year needs to be completely redesigned and rethought. Another thing that I would say to boards, I get asked all the time by board directors, how do I know that we're an innovative organization? How do I know that we're really competitive and innovative? Well, there's a really easy way of knowing that. And that is, are you having a fairly easy time of employing people who are willing to work for less than what they're worth because they want to work for your organization? Do you have many more applicants for jobs at market or even a little bit below market pricing? Because if you do, it means that you're a company that people really want to work for. They want the experience with your company. They want you on their resume. Of course, the risk is always that they're using you as a leapfrog or a ladder to go somewhere else. But you can ameliorate that with, once they're on board, making sure that you do all the things that you need to keep them, if you want to keep them. And don't forget that we're living in a hybrid workforce right now, a hybrid, where we have to move away from the term workplace and move toward the term workspace, because people are working in many different conditions, under many different conditions, in different environments and in different ways. So the important thing is, can you attract the talent easily, more than you need, without having to pay extremely high prices for them? And then, do you know how to keep them? And then I would just say to work seriously on the vision of the company, because so much more board time is set aside for strategies. And strategies come and go. They really are not the be all and end all, although companies begin to protect their strategies as if they were, and they lose sight of their vision sometimes in terms of what they're supposed to be. And there are so many examples that are scattered out there of companies that have lost sight of their vision, and somebody else swooped in, picked it up, and made a success of it, while the original company was still chugging along with its existing strategies.
Yeah.
So I would say that those are some of the risks and opportunities.
It's complex times for board members, and we really do need to think very differently than we have in the past. And I think that also means we may need some quite different people in the boardroom as a result of it. So, always fascinating talking to you, Edie. Some great food for thought for all of our members, and so appreciate you taking the time to be here with me today.
It's my pleasure, Jennifer.